In the news tonight, His Majesty affirms that youth are the main motive of the development process and announces an initiative for democratic development at a ceremony marking the 50th anniversary of the University of Jordan. The Egyptian government has given the military the authority to arrest civilians to help safeguard a constitutional referendum planned for next Saturday. And 3 EU presidents received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the bloc for its decades of stability and democracy after the 2 world wars. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King said youth are the key engine that drives the development process and the vehicle and purpose of development. Addressing students at the University of Jordan on its 50th anniversary, King Abdullah said the role of the youth should not be limited to the campus. Students' talents and energy, he said, should be harnessed to effect positive change across the board and reflect political participation that enables them to take part in decision-making to build a better future for them and future generations. His Majesty also announced an initiative for democratic development under the umbrella of the King Abdullah II Fund for Development. The plan, he is designed to promote dialogue, encourage civil participation, and achieve sustainable political development by focusing on youth empowerment. The plan is designed to promote the values of dialogue and achieve sustainable political development by focusing on youth. His Majesty said we are all required to rise to responsibility and the challenges facing our country. His Majesty urged young people to hold to account the coming legislatures and parliamentary governments and judge them by their commitment to implementing their platforms and proposals. His Majesty urged universities to focus on the quality education, saying universities are required to introduce fresh policies and programs that adopt the highest criteria and best practices in the region and the world. Jordan, he said, has been a pioneer in several fields, especially education and healthcare, and has been playing a leading and prominent role in defending Arab and Islamic cases. His Majesty the King directed the government to take the legal steps with the state prosecutor to release detainees held after protests against the government's decision to liberalize the prices of oil derivatives last month. Minister of State for Media Affairs and Communications and official government spokesman Samih Al-Maaita said that the government will take the necessary legal measures to fulfill the royal directive. He reiterated that the government respects peaceful protests that adhere to the fundamental policies of the state and the lawful demands to the law and the Constitution. The minister said that assaulting public and private property is a crime punishable by the law and is not in any way associated with freedom of expression. He said a total of 116 detainees will be set free and only 13 who had previous criminal records will remain in jail on criminal complicity, abduction, and other serious charges. His Majesty the King discussed with Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi the latest developments in the Middle East. During a telephone conversation, the King and Morsi also reviewed bilateral and means of boosting them in various fields. His Majesty King Abdullah welcomed visiting former President of the Dominican Republic, Leonel Antonio Fernandez Reina, and discussed various areas of cooperation between Jordan and the Caribbean nation. The King thanked the former leader for choosing the University of Jordan as the site of a Latin American Studies Center, the first in the Arab world, seeking to promote scientific and cultural ties between Arab and Latin American nations. The two leaders also discussed latest developments in Syria and efforts to achieve peace and stability in the Middle East. Fernandez Reina thanked His Majesty for his efforts to strengthen the friendship between Jordan and Latin America and commended Jordan's endeavors to promote peace and security in the region. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour also met with the former President of the Dominican Republic and discussed means of forging closer cooperation between the two countries in various fields. Talks also covered the latest developments in the Middle East, mainly efforts to bring about peace and stability in the region. His Majesty the King tasked the King Abdullah Fund for Development with the creation of a new program with a focus on enhancing civic engagement and strengthening democratic values through social entrepreneurship. The King asked the fund to develop initiatives to use social entrepreneurship to deepen social dialogue, broaden youth participation, hold public institutions accountable, and strengthen democratic culture and values. The fund's chairman, Omar Razak, program will be a means to build and strengthen grassroots participation in a democratic culture and will encourage citizens to be active participants, not just during elections. Over the next few months, the King Abdullah Fund will be developing the details for the new program, whose activities include supporting entrepreneurs working in the areas of community empowerment, increasing transparency and accountability of government activities, and creating new public debates and forums. The Egyptian government has temporarily given the military the authority to arrest civilians to safeguard a constitutional referendum planned for next Saturday. The order, issued late yesterday, said the military would support police and liaise with them to protect vital institutions until the referendum result is declared. The decree gave army officers the right to make arrests, transfer detainees to prosecutors. Meanwhile, protesters remained camped outside the presidential palace in Cairo a day after Egypt's main opposition coalition rejected President Mohamed Morsi's plan for a constitutional referendum this week. Fresh battles raged across Syria, with government forces carrying out airstrikes and rebels fighting back on the ground. Rebel fighters were reported to have captured large parts of a military base in Aleppo, in the latest in a string of losses by government forces. Government warplanes reportedly bombed suburbs of the capital Damascus amid fierce clashes in the surrounding countryside. Lu'ay Balqar has the latest on the fighting in Syria.
The fighting between the Syrian government forces and the rebels remains fierce. Rebel fighters are reported to have captured large parts of a big military base in the northern province of Aleppo. It is in a string of losses by government forces. In Deir al-Zur, the government forces shelled a built-up area with large explosions, hitting the buildings, and a constant exchange of gunfire can be heard. In the southwestern Damascus suburb of Daria, most of the local have moved out of the area, leaving vacant houses scattered along the streets. Government tanks can be seen patrolling the streets in order to clear out the opposition snipers after most of the opposition fled the area, and orchard bushes have been cut down to prevent the rebels from using them as a place to hide and launch attacks. Heavy smoke can be seen far behind resident buildings where gunshots are frequently heard. The suburb of Douma looked like a ghost town after a weekend of fighting throughout the capital. The explosions rocked the city, and columns of black smoke could be seen rising above the suburbs. Some 40,000 people have been killed in Syria, as fighting between rebels and the army has raged in almost every city, and the fact that fighting has reached this level in Damascus is a worrying sign. Lu'ay Balqar, News at 10.
Meanwhile, Syria's Monitoring National Dialogue Committee called the first meeting in Damascus discussing political solutions to the country's crisis. The meeting, attended by nearly 40 representatives of the Syrian government and opposition parties, came in response to an agreement of the Tehran conference held earlier in November. The representatives shared their views on peaceful solutions to the national crisis and welcomed any proposal that is against violence and against external political interference.
The committee will draw all parties in Syria together, whether opposition or pro-government parties. It's going to organize everyone from all levels of society to speak out against violence. And we are going to launch a national dialogue which involves all Syrian people.
In neighboring Lebanon, tension remained high in the northern city of Tripoli as the Lebanese army deployed on the streets after 6 days of fierce clashes. Fighting with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades killed at least 3 people, raising the total to over 14 dead in a week and more than 150 wounded. Tensions have run high since at least 14 Sunni Muslim, Lebanese and Palestinian gunmen were killed by Syrian security forces a week ago. Lebanese authorities yesterday received the first 3 bodies from the group of 14 killed. And back here at home, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met with Secretaries General of leftist and pan-Arabist parties within the government's efforts to encourage participation in the upcoming parliamentary elections. Mansour urged the parties to shoulder their responsibility in developing political life, adding the government is keen on the participation of all in the January 23rd polls. He said the only guarantee for successful elections is ensuring their fairness and neutrality, that the Independent Elections Commission is the only body that will manage and oversee the polls. The government, he said, is committed to fighting corruption and bringing the corrupt to justice. Celebrating the International Day for Persons with Disabilities, Her Majesty Queen Rania, His Royal Highness Prince Raad bin Zayed, President of the Higher Council for Affairs of Persons with Disabilities, HCD, joined a group of children with disabilities at the Children's Museum. They toured the different facilities and were briefed on the collaborative work done by both the museum and the HCD. The museum and HCD organized a month-long program to raise awareness of the rights of all children with or without disabilities to play, explore, and learn. Under the program, free access to the museum's facilities will be granted to all people with disabilities and their families. The program's main objective is to foster a culture of inclusion within the museum and give other children the opportunity to learn things from the perspective of people with disabilities. Among the activities featured at the museum are demonstrations of Tahadda, developed and implemented in collaboration with the British Council. Its inclusion through sports is a project that is part of Inspiration 2012 as the legacy of the London Olympic and Paralympic Games. The Jordan Atomic Energy Commission, JAEC, organized a workshop in cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency on uranium production from phosphate rocks. The 5-day workshop is attended by representatives of 30 countries with the aim of building more capacity, exchange of expertise, adopt best practices, and move ahead as part of a network currently being established on the extraction of uranium from phosphate. Chairman of the JAEC, Khal said Jordan is fully committed to the policies of developing sustainable and peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology.
Today, with the global trend for securing more uranium as a result of the global nuclear energy renaissance, where uranium is the main resource for nuclear fuel, Jordan will definitely be a leading role in the production of uranium, whether from carbonate rocks through alkali leaching or extraction of uranium from phosphoric acid through the fertilizer complexes.
European Union foreign ministers held talks with the leader of Syria's new coalition, Mu'adh al-Khatib, to determine how far the bloc can support the rebel group fighting the rule of President Bashar al-Assad. Britain and France have already called the Syrian National Coalition the sole legitimate representative of the Syrian people. Any EU move towards fuller recognition or enhanced support would boost the Friends of Syria meeting on Wednesday in the Moroccan city of Marrakesh. EU Foreign Affairs Chief Catherine Ashton stressed the importance of a political process to help re-establish peace in Syria.
It's important that there has to be a political process alongside everything else. You get from here to the position where you have an inclusive, chosen government in Syria that the people can all feel proud of.
I hope that the EU today will give some momentum to that in whatever words we choose together, and that when we get to Marrakesh on Wednesday there will be more nations giving their full recognition.
The European Union received the Nobel Peace Prize honored by the Norwegian Committee, which looked beyond Europe's current malaise to recognize its decades of stability and democracy after the horrors of 2 world wars. The EU sent 3 of its presidents to the Oslo ceremony for the 2012 prize. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande sat next to each other in what was seen as a dramatic example in history of reconciliation. The prize money of $1.25 million will be given to projects help children struggling in war zones, with the recipients to be announced next week. The EU has said it will match the prize money so that a total of €2 million will be given to the selected aid projects. Khaled Dababni has more.
The European Union received the Nobel Peace Prize as a continent of peace. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande made a united victory stance to a surprise round of applause.
We must stand together. We have collective responsibility. Without this European cooperation, the result might easily have been new protectionism, new nationalism, with the risk that the ground gained would be lost. And we know from the interwar years that this is what can happen when ordinary people pay the bills for a crisis triggered by others. But the solution now, as then, is not for the countries to act on their own at the expense of others, nor to blame vulnerable minorities. That would lead us into yesterday's trap. Europe needs to move forward.
European Council President Herman Van Rompuy and European Commission President José Manuel Barroso accept the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of Europe. The Nobel Committee said the organization had helped transform Europe from a continent of wars to a continent of peace in the decades since World War II.
I believe the European Union deserves this award. It's in fact probably the most successful ever process of reconciliation and union in transnational terms. We have now 27, very soon 20 countries united, not only around the value of peace, but freedom and democracy. So I really believe it's deserved this prize, Nobel Peace Prize for the European Union.
Commission President Barroso, a former Prime Minister of Portugal, who was part of the struggle to turn his country into a democracy in 1974, emphasized the need to tackle the bloody crisis in Syria.
As a community of nations that has overcome war and fought totalitarianism, we will always stand by those who are in pursuit of peace and human dignity. And let me say it from here today, the current situation in Syria is a stain on the world's conscience, and the international community has a moral duty to address it.
Van Rompuy said the prize was due recognition of what earlier generations had achieved in forging peace.
I was born after the war and was the first generation in Europe that could make his life without war. So I belong to the first generation of peace, 60 years of peace. The first time that this happened in the long history of Europe. Since centuries, we haven't had that period of peace for 60 years. So my answer is a very simple one. And is an answer on the hand of facts, not on other arguments. The facts prove that the European Union is a peacekeeping instrument of first order.
Europe is suffering feeble economic growth or recession, soaring unemployment, and a number of countries that share the single currency are unable to pay their debts. It has been called the worst economic crisis since World War II. That is why many people are finding it difficult to understand why the EU and its 27 member states should receive the award. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
Lionel Messi reached yet another milestone in his phenomenal career after setting a record for goals scored in a calendar year of 86. Following his double goals in the La Liga yesterday against Real Betis, Messi broke the record of Gerd Muller's 40-year tally of 85. Messi has netted 74 times for Barca and 12 for Argentina so far, and still has 2 league matches and 1 King's Cup game to add to his tally before the end of the year. Yesterday's goals, Messi also became Barca's all-time top league scorer on 192 goals, 2 more than Cesar Rodriguez. He is also a favorite to secure a 4th successive World Player Award next month. American Sebastian Zetz claimed the Vans Triple Crown of surfing with a strong showing in the early rounds of the Billabong Pipe Masters tournament. The Hawaiian clinched the win after eliminating heavy favorite John Florence. The Vans Triple Crown of surfing consists of tournaments in a row, starting with the Reef Hawaiian Pro, the Vans World Cup of Surfing, and the Billabong Pipe Masters. Zetz took first place at the Reef Hawaiian Pro and third at the Vans World Cup of Surfing. In addition to the $100,000 cash prize, he will also take home a $30,000 Harley Davidson motorcycle and a $10,000 watch.
Fingers as we see George Martinson going back door in the barrel, and he's
And finally, a quick look at the weather forecast. Cold and partly tonight with rain in the northern and central regions accompanied by thunder. Winds will be westerly brisk, blowing dust in the southern and eastern regions. Similar weather conditions prevail tomorrow with westerly to northwesterly moderate to brisk winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect fair conditions tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds, slightly choppy seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, his reminder of the day's top story. His Majesty affirms that youth are the main motive of the development process and announces an initiative for democratic development at a ceremony marking the 50th anniversary of the University of Jordan. The Egyptian government has given the military the authority to arrest civilians to help safeguard the constitutional referendum planned for next Saturday. And 3 EU presidents received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of Europe for its decades of stability and democracy after the 2 world wars. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Aliyah Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.